Welcome to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McLernan, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. Before we dive in, I want to let you know about two very important things. Number one, the stories shared here are often gritty, raw, and vulnerable, and very likely will include speaking about sensitive topics suited for a mature audience. Number two, this podcast is also broadcast live on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So on whatever platform you follow myself or Freedom Nutrition Coaching, you have the opportunity to participate in this discussion during the live stream. And we encourage your participation both by commenting and asking questions. And so this podcast is about exploring the stories that take place between the before and after photos, not just in the realm of weight loss, but in all areas of life. So let's dive in. All right, I'm super excited. I'm always excited for my guests, though, coming all the way from down under. I'm not sure how you're staying in your chair being upside down, but I guess Australians have a special trick. How you doing, Mary? It's good to have you on the show.
Hey, John. How you doing? Great to be here.
Yeah. So where in Australia are you located?
I'm based in Melbourne, which is down under Australia. I'm right at the bottom.
Right at the bottom of Australia, yeah.
On the bottom of Australia on the East Coast. And, we're known, as you know, for having 4 seasons in one day, quite literally. And it's happening every day at the moment. So.
Well, I think as a Canadian, having lived in Australia a couple of different times, I find like the climate down in the state of Victoria, which is where Melbourne is located, is much more tolerable than Queensland, which is like the tropical north.
Yes.
My in-laws lived up there for about 15 years, and so we'd go and visit, and usually visit for a couple of months at a time. And I just found it like brutal, like the stifling, because we'd often leave in the middle of winter, where in Canada, it's like minus 40, and then you hit like Queensland, and it's like plus 40 with 200% humidity, and you just feel like a walking puddle of grossness. And so I'm like, whose idea was this? And there's the shock. I'm like, do I take my coat with me in the airport, or do I just do a freezing walk from my car to the airport?
I love it. But it's true.
Yeah. But I mean, over here, we can get variations of like minus 40 to plus 40. And
Sure.
people don't realize we can hit those temperatures in Canada as well. It's not super common, but we do hit it. So,
It does happen.
yeah. So for people who are just tuning in, what are you up to these days? Like, how do you occupy your time besides being awesome?
Oh, well, I mean, look, a lot of my time is consumed. I mean, I'm a mum, first and foremost. I have 2 boys. One is 10 and one's 12. They both attend a school that's 100% online, and they absolutely love it. So it's kind of like this new modern way of learning. So they're just fantastic. I spend a lot of time with them. I really nurture them. I'm very conscious about raising highly conscious boys. So I spend a lot of time in that space. And of course, I have my business, which is I'm also a coach, and I work with industry experts. And, John, some people like to call their vocation a job, but my vocation really is my passion. It truly, truly is. And, it took me a long time to get here, but, I run a very successful coaching practice. I work with amazing people. I spend a lot of time thinking. I do a lot of reading. I don't have a TV at home, so there's no TV time for me. It's either a book or it's time in contemplation or journaling. So that's sort of really my life wrapped up at the moment.
Yes. So Mary Henderson Coaching, is it?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, I can join in the club of people who are truly passionate about coaching, and it's more than just a job. It is a vocation. It is a calling, really.
Yeah.
One that I ran for many years myself. I've had 11 different careers. And so it took me quite a while to get to the place where I was comfortable with the fact that this is what I'm really good at. This is what I'm born to do, and this is what I love. So I commend you for stepping into that space as well. And, everyone has a story. And I love the opportunity to explore, like as we say in the intro, the stories that shape us. How do we get to this place where this is what we're doing with our life? Because I think growing up, maybe this wasn't your dream, or maybe it wasn't even on your radar that you were going to be like an executive and a professional coach. And so, did you grow up in Melbourne as well? Like, are you born and raised there, or have you traveled around Australia?
I'm born and raised in Melbourne. Both of my parents migrated here in the 60s and my dad in the 50s. And, I'm just the typical daughter of a migrant family that came to Melbourne. My mum's Yugoslav, my dad's Greek. So It doesn't get any more complicated than that.
Yeah, actually, I believe like throughout history there was definitely some animosity between
Yeah,
like the Greeks and the
love it.
Yugoslav region. Yeah, the
Yeah,
Slavic region there.
I
Yeah.
know.
So but they could come to Australia and find love.
They found love.
I
So
mean, I
there you
hope.
go. It
Yeah,
does happen. It does happen.
it does happen. It
They're
does
still
happen.
together till this day, so something's obviously working. No,
Yes, yes. So isn't that great? Some of these new world countries you can come to,
yeah,
you can leave some of the old history behind and create something like that and create like a new life and a new beginning. I know a friend of my dad grew up between New Zealand and Australia, though he's actually interestingly born in Canada. But he had a friend whose father escaped from communist Yugoslavia into
yes,
Greece, and he was supposed to get on a ship to Canada. He wanted to go to Canada, got on the
yes.
wrong ship and ended up in New Zealand. Um, but he talked about, so he was like a student protester under sort of communist rule and whatnot. He talked about like escaping from like being naked in a prison cell, doing push-ups to stay warm, having scraps of meat that he'd like stolen to feed the dogs to escape under the barbed wire and stuff like that, like because he was scheduled for execution. So the stuff that I just share that because I'm like, man, sometimes we don't realize just how darn lucky we are to like live
Oh
in
my
these
God.
free and amazing countries when people literally crawled under barbed wire and escaped under threat of death to get to these countries where we enjoy freedom. So it is pretty cool.
Spot on. I actually relate to that story, and my grandparents shared many stories like that. Both my parents are children of war. They've experienced war. They've been in the thick of it. And, I often think to myself, like, how do you actually survive something like that and become a normal person? And
Yeah.
then you migrate to a country that is so foreign to you. You do not know the language. You literally are here with one suitcase, literally,
Yeah.
and you have to start your life all over again. I mean, I just don't think I could do that. I really don't. I
It's
mean,
boggling your mind. Like
yeah,
I just think of like it might sound, and I don't think it is over dramatic, but it's traumatic to go through something like that where your entire life is in upheaval and you're dumped into an entirely new country where you don't speak the language, where people may not be entirely kind to you as well because there's a gap in understanding. And to do that and to build a life, like the strength of character that takes. And I think about an interview I did recently with another lady, and she talks about transgenerational trauma, and it's really really
yeah,
fascinating stuff where and I don't know if I'll piece it together exactly correct, but essentially, the way that we could think about it is your mom's, was it your grandmother's eggs, which were formed, at birth, essentially lead to like what became your mother. So the trauma that your grandmother felt or experienced through epigenetics becomes like what your mom carries in her genetic code, which became a part of you. And so it's, and I'm totally messing this up, but essentially the long story short is trauma skips a generation where whatever
yes,
your grandparents went through is kind of written epigenetically into your DNA, which is
yeah.
really fascinating to think about.
It is because you look at your traits and your character, and there are just some things that you just can't explain. I can tell you right now. In fact, I'm actually exploring this in the form of in archetypes at the moment, and I'm like,
Mm.
why do I do that all the time? Like, I mean, I can't explain that. I can't explain it, but it just, and I'm like, oh my God. And I look back at my grandmother. You're absolutely right, and her life was trauma. Like, there's just aspects of her life that I can totally see that I have as part of me that I've never experienced, but suddenly it becomes
Yeah.
a character. It's really weird, but it is absolutely true.
Yeah, because and now my brain is like trying to piece it all together, but it's like, so yeah, it's like, yeah, the eggs that your grandmother had carried in her ovaries that became what formed your mother and so on and so forth. Because I think like my grandmother, she was born in 1914. It's the first 4 years of her life. Like we are going through World War One, 1917 Spanish flu pandemic, and she was the one that discovered her sister deceased in her crib, you know. Had to stay home, instead of going to school to like raise her 11 siblings because my great grandparents were too ill to raise them, so had to give up going to school. Became a janitor because that's she didn't have sort of extra or post secondary education. Lost everything in a house fire. Had one of her sons died at the age of 7 when he drowned, and I just think like a lot of this happened even before she had electricity, let alone like the internet and cell phones and had to even, and it just blows my mind. And I go, wow, anytime I want to complain about my life, I just sort of
Yeah,
look back to two generations before what my grandparents went through and I go, oh, That thing that I wanted to complain about, like, I can hardly fathom what it was that they experienced, and so, yeah, I think it's super, super fascinating, and I imagine I'd be curious, how some of these elements, and your understanding of sort of the human psyche and whatnot sort of play into the type of coaching that you do, because, if I understand correctly, do you work primarily with, like, business executives? Is it in, like, business development as from on an entrepreneurial standpoint, or, like, C-suite executives, or what is it that you do?
I typically work with industry experts. So anyone that self-identifies as an industry expert, it could be someone in C-suite, it could be somebody that's a PhD, an academic,
Mm-mm.
it could be somebody that already is a coach, but they're just not commercializing in the way that they want. So it just really depends. But typically, they are called industry experts. But just to answer that question, to extend that, in what I realized about my upbringing based on that background is that it really does form your character. In some ways, you acquire traits that you think, what the hell? Like, where did that
Yeah.
but then on the other side, I've developed some amazing traits, resilience,
Mm,
patience. My communication skills, I would say, is actually my number one skill because when I was growing up, I was the interpreter, from the age of
okay.
5, with my grandparents not being able to speak English. So each time my grandparents would go shopping or the doctor, my grandmother would grab me. I would be the interpreter, and that was basically my role. And
Right.
so and it was interesting that kind of shapes you into becoming this tolerant person because that's what
Yeah.
it's amazing. And tolerance is another one. Like my tolerance level is so high. Takes a lot to push me over the edge. But I learned all of these traits as part of my character because of that upbringing. And you don't think that it impacts you, at the time you're like, oh my God, I got to go to the doctor with granny again. But the thing is that
Yeah.
think about it from the age of 5, this is molding now my brain of how I listen, how I transfer the information,
Yeah.
language, then transfer it back to English, and then have to find words as a 7-year-old. Like, really? And
Yeah.
so it forces you to really grow up and mature. But most importantly, it's that tolerance, John. And I don't see tolerance in our society anymore. I really think that we've completely lost that. Really, we have. Like,
And maybe we could give a just a Cole's Notes definition of tolerance as you see it, because I think right now often tolerance gets used in the capacity of just like basically accepting anybody as they are and so on and so forth. And I think you're referring to it from a slightly different perspective here.
I'm talking about it from the perspective of putting yourself in someone's shoes.
Mm,
That's
mm,
exactly
mm.
my perspective because I can't be tolerant. It's just like you and I just spoke about our grandparents. Okay. I could say, oh my God, my mom's this, my mom did, but she did this to me. But when you actually put it in context and you put yourself into their shoes,
Mm, mm.
do you become tolerant? You can say, I know I'm grateful or whatever language you want to wrap
Mm,
around
mm,
that.
mm.
But it really is about being tolerant. And you don't see this in the school system either. There's no tolerance anymore. It's my way or the highway. You fit in my box or you don't fit in my box.
Mm,
You
mm.
know, you're this religion or you're not that religion. You follow this politics or you don't. So do you see what I mean? There's no tolerance.
Yeah,
There's no
there's a lot of polarization happening, and
yeah,
we're losing. I really feel as though we're losing the capacity for nuance. And so for
yeah,
me, it's an integral part of the coaching I do is really compassion, and compassion is kind of the ability to seek to understand without necessarily having, empathy. I think of compassion as like empathy 2.0. So empathy is, really the ability to feel someone else's pain, but if all we do is feel their pain, we don't actually help them move forward. And compassion is really desire to help them move forward from their place of suffering, and rather than say enabling unhelpful behaviors. And so I think that's really, really fantastic. I wanted to dive more into kind of your personal story growing up as well, because I think you actually wanted to be a professional singer. Is that right?
correct. Absolutely. Oh my God, like rock star in the making. I still
Mm-hmm.
like silently believe that, that, right? I'm the one that's in the bedroom singing, in the shower singing, and when there's a karaoke, you can be guaranteed I'll be the first one on the stage. But that was my dream. That's
Yeah.
absolutely right. Had my parents thankfully set me to train my voice from the age of 5 right up until my late teens. And it really impacted my life massively, like massively. and in a beautiful way. It was like my escapism. I used to write songs, and it was, again, my escapism. It was about me writing how I felt. I didn't grow up in a family that allowed me to express myself emotionally. And, my parents were constantly fighting with each other. There was just this misunderstanding constantly. So my sister and I, we were constantly caught in the middle. And as a kid, I couldn't handle that noise. So singing for me was a really great way to escape from all of that, and getting my pencil and a notepad out and writing writing songs. It was just all about self-expression. So my voice became a big part of my character. It really defined my persona. It defined who I was. It gave me an identity that I really loved and I was proud of. So it was a really
Yeah.
important part.
Were you performing, like, in High School Musicals and things like that? And
Every High School Musical that there was, I was the first one, there. Like I would, it was just hilarious. But I would always get the lead role, or I would always get a major role in all the musicals. Or it was just even. I mean, I went to a Catholic girls' school, so then we had the choir. I was involved in
Right, yeah.
everything musical. I was involved, and it was just known. Like, oh, of course, just get Mary, or Mary will do this, or Mary. So it was just such a massive part of my my identity, and I really, I embraced it.
Mm-mm. And maybe this is part of what led to, because I think after sort of maybe being discouraged or even prevented from pursuing this as a vocation, it's like there's a loss of identity that takes place there, and
Oh,
you kind of go through this period of grieving or mourning and whatnot. And so you said, in sort of our pre-show communication, that like this set you into kind of a downward spiral for a number of years. What was that kind of like for you?
it was, it was just awful, John. Like, the thing is that, all my life as a kid and as a teenager, my expectation and belief system was I was only going to go to the College of Arts. Like, that's all I could see. It's all I
Mm,
wanted. And then my parents were like, that's just not going to happen. Like, what sort of a career do you have going to the College of Arts? Like, we migrated here, to give you this great education. You need to be a doctor or a lawyer. Like, you can't embarrass us. It was that was the mindset of that generation. And
yeah.
especially migrants, like, they have this idea that, when they have your photograph plastered on the wall with your university degree in your hand, somehow it validates them as great parents. And that's just an old paradigm. And so when they said no, I'm like, well, what do I do now? Like, I actually am not interested in anything else except performing arts. And so I went to university. I studied psychology. I hated
Mm.
every second of it. I pulled out in my last year, or not the last, sorry, I pulled out in the third year. That wasn't my last year, but I pulled out in the third year. And I was just like, I just got to get a job. I got a job in the media industry. That's where I started my career. And I was really miserable throughout my entire 20s. Like, I was sad. I was
Yeah.
very, very sad. Just lost, had no idea where I was going. But the problem is with that is that then I started to self-destruct, and
Okay.
started to really self-destruct, get involved in with the wrong crowd, getting, in going to places where it's very, very dark, and when you start going down that path, it's game over unless
Mm-mm.
you actually wake up. And I did have
Yeah.
my wake up call, like, I just one day was, and I ended up marrying like this just terrible person who just treated me terribly. But of course he was going to treat me terribly because I treated myself terribly. Who else
Right,
was I
right.
going to attract?
Right, and so, did you have kind of like a rock bottom moment here? Because I was kinda curious, when you're in that frame of mind, how it affects the relationships that you form.
Oh, massively. Like, what relationships did I have? Like, every relationship I had was just destructive. It was based on deceit. It was just dark. So I ended up marrying this guy, which lasted for 3 months. And it was horror. It was a horror movie. And I realized immediately that this guy is just taking me down a pathway that it's not going to end up very well. So I
Mm,
was conscious enough to realize that and recognize that. So I left that relationship, but that was when really I hit rock bottom, John, because I really, really was I lost my identity. I actually didn't know who I was. I was wrapped up in this cloud of darkness, and it was so thick. I just couldn't get out of it. And then honestly,
Yeah, that's
like
one of the toughest places really to be. And I guess I'm curious, like, so because a 3-month marriage is not a very long one, but how long had you been in a relationship, and how did you meet this guy, and how did that relationship form? Because I'm kind of curious about the dynamics here, and if you had hopes that marriage was going to change things for you.
Yes, well, of course, I thought that that was going to save me. I met this guy at a bar. He was working behind the bar. That was the first red flag. And then we ended up having this like quasi relationship. He was originally from Perth, which is in the western side of Australia.
Mm.
And I ended up moving to Perth with him. He got a job working in the mines, and here we are working. He's away, and I'm living in this apartment by myself, miserable, totally unhappy, lonely. And how do you build a relationship with somebody that
Yeah,
doesn't live with you, right? So you think it's a relationship when you're on the phone, every second day, and it's like, oh, hi babe, how are you? Blah blah blah. It's all just light, but realistically, there is no relationship. So
Mm-hmm.
then we get married, and it was like two strangers and walking down the aisle. In fact, the day I was getting married, I looked at my mum and dad and I said, I can't do this. This is wrong. And my mum, being a very dominant personality, she's like, I'm sorry, Mary, the show must go on. They were her exact words. And so I walked down the aisle like freaking out. It's like this little girl walking down the aisle, not a woman, a girl. Like I was so frightened, so scared, because I knew what was waiting for me, and I was exactly right. I was 100% accurate.
Mm-mm. And it's a very interesting way of phrasing it. Like, you were, I guess, in your 20s at this point in time, but there's like a little girl on the inside. And I think when we go through something where we lose like a piece of our identity, sometimes we get kind of caught or like frozen in a certain emotional state. And so, while chronologically or in a time-based sense, you might have been in your mid to late 20s, but emotionally and mentally, you were still that teenager
Exactly.
who had these big dreams that were kind of stolen from you because you'd spent a number of years just kind of wandering around in limbo, not really developing and maturing as an individual.
100%. You're absolutely spot on. And, I also do believe, John, that everything is divinely orchestrated. I do believe in that concept. I really do. I feel that, even though there were a lot of inner battles that I had to overcome, I could see that I was that child that had so many battles ahead of me in my 20s, even in my 30s. But it does shape you for the better. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
you become and when you get into your 40s, what happens is that this burden starts to just, leave you, because you know how to deal with it. You have tools, you have
Yeah.
strategies, mentors, etc. So you're mature enough to actually, go become the person that you are meant to be, not meant to become, but you're actually meant to be.
Yeah, and I love that because I think I mean I've just ticked over 40, and yeah, I was a little surprised when you said you're in your 40s. I was going to pick a little bit younger than that. So, um, but
You're so
it's true that there's a certain degree of freedom that comes with because
right.
of the different experiences that we go through that like shape who we become. We almost like I think like I'm grateful for some of the hardest experiences that I've been through because I wouldn't do what I do right now, working the way that I do with the people that I do, if I hadn't gone through those experiences that forced me to dig deep and even come to the end of myself and actually have to humble myself to ask for help and get what I needed. And so I gathered so this marriage didn't go so well, and you had to really dig yourself like you hit your rock bottom after you left the marriage. Was it really a sense of like I don't even know who I am and how do I find myself?
Oh my God, absolutely. And and the thing is that, I remember sitting in my car at the traffic lights and just screaming in my car, like so loud. It was just the most weirdest moment, because it wasn't like I was like it was leading towards this moment. It just happened. It's like something overcame me, and I was like, I will never, ever, ever, ever allow anyone to ever control me ever again, ever, ever, ever. And like it was almost like I was enraged. Honestly, if somebody was looking at me, they were like, this. here's a case, we need to send it, to the white room. But
Yeah.
honestly, but it was so cathartic,
Yeah,
and,
I was gonna say a
that
bit
was
like a
my
visceral expression,
yes,
release of
yes,
emotions that needed to come out because they
needed.
only they only come out through the top, they don't come out through the bottom.
Well, the thing is that was a very, very pivotal moment for me, because in that moment I was like, I got to change my life. Like, I have got to change my life. It's totally up to me. And that was the day, that was my first day. Like, I was like, okay, what do I want to do for the rest of my life? What industry do I want to work in? How do I see myself? How much do I want to earn? What car do I want to drive? Where do I want to live? Like, all of these things that I aspired to be and have, I was like, I can still do that. I can be that. I'm not old. I can have all of this. And so I decided in that moment that I was going to get a job in the tech industry, and that I was going to, really make that my vocation, because the tech. Till this day, the tech industry is vibrant. It's alive. It changes all the
Mm-mm.
time. It matches my persona. And so, would you believe, John, that it took me 12 months to actually land my dream job? But I persisted. It wasn't not like I applied for one or two jobs. I applied for over 150 jobs. I had 48 face-to-face interviews. I always came second best. Never quite got the number one, but I persisted. I was resilient. I knew how to be resilient. I knew how to be tolerant. I knew how to be patient. That's when those traits really kicked in and played a huge role. But the job that I landed changed the trajectory of the rest of my life.
Yeah, and what was that job?
That was working for a tech company, which still is the largest IT distribution company in the world, and American based, was American based, and I was in sales. I got a job in sales in actually the middle management role, and I just got the most amazing opportunity in that job, and it was in that job where I learned about personal branding. That's where I came face to face with personal branding and made it my version. And it was so interesting. Honestly, I did not know that I had this way of bringing the best out in people, if you will. But I had my own little system in my head that I was capable of doing that for
Mm-mm.
others as well. And so that's where my journey actually began. But it took 12 months. It wasn't 12 days or 12 weeks. It was 12 months of sheer persistence.
Right. So you said in your mind after having a cathartic screaming session in your car at a traffic light,
Mm.
that I'm going to change the trajectory of my life, and then you decided you're going to go into the tech industry. Now, your educational background, which was I think your undergraduate degree, had you completed any other education, or was it still just sitting as an incomplete undergraduate degree, and you decide doesn't really matter. I'm going to go into the tech industry. How did you start looking? Like, how do you even start in something like that?
I just was relentless. I just called every recruiter that I could that was in the tech space, and I just had meetings. I applied for jobs. I just kept on applying for jobs. All the jobs that were advertised in the tech industry under the banner of sales, I was there, and I was just going for it. Like, I was applying for a lot of jobs. So
Mm,
it wasn't like it was easy to find the jobs to apply for. That wasn't the problem. It was actually just landing, because it was in such high demand. Everyone wanted to be in the tech industry. So if you didn't have the experience, you were the last one on the list. Even though my personality was great, they loved me, blah, blah, blah. I just never quite got it. But this job that I landed, honestly, the way that it happened was just so unreal. But it was meant to be. It was and I just shined. I actually became the number one salesperson in all of Asia Pacific when I worked in that company.
amazing.
It
Yeah.
was, and the highest paid salesperson in the industry. It was crazy. So
Yeah.
I turned my life around. I really did.
So when you're at like month 7, you don't know that this is a 12-month journey. You're at like month 7. You faced a significant amount of rejection. You've applied for a lot of jobs. You're doggedly determined that this is the future that you want, and yet 7 months in, like you haven't been seeing the result you're looking for. How did you navigate through that slog? What kept you going?
Oh, well, I have to share this with people, because this is such an important lesson and a learning. I then started to have fun with it. Like, instead of being all dreary and depressed and poor me and victim mode, I was like, you know what? I'm at the point now. where, and I laugh when I say this because it actually is, and my sister and I, we were killing ourselves laughing. I'm like, I'm just going to apply for this job here, which is a CEO of some major, tech company, or a CMO, like all C-suite roles, right? And there's no way that I'm like, absolutely not for me. But I'm like, I'm just going to do it. Like, what have I got to lose? And I started having fun, and like really having fun, and we would just kill ourselves laughing, like with absolute conviction, and just like, that laughter in the belly. It was like that. And so I'd be like, oh, I wonder what they would say. I wonder what but anyway, this one recruiter, he actually called me and he's like, hey, Mary, I think his name was Hans. He was German. It was so funny. He's like, hey, Mary, my name's Hans. You applied for the CMO role for blah, blah, blah company. And he said, I'd like you to come in and we'd like to interview. And I'm like, what the,
You're like, what?
What you're talking about, Willis moment. It was it was like, oh my God. So anyway, I actually go in and have this meeting with this guy, and he sits me down and he's like, so what made you apply for this job? And I'm like, and I literally just burst into laughter. And I said, well, if I didn't apply for that job, I wouldn't be sitting here right now, would I? And he's just like, he goes, I just had to bring you in here just to meet you. He said, do you know how courageous this is? And I said to him, and I told him exactly what I was doing. And we were in that room. He was laughing with me, like we were crying. And I said to him, I've realized something. I said, if I have fun with this, the right job will come. So I said, I can be gloom and doom, or I can turn the whole thing around and I can play with it, because I said, and what I realized, John, is that our soul loves to have fun. Like, honestly, like that's what lights us up, because you laugh and it's light. It's like, what have I got to lose? It's like a game. It doesn't matter what happens, because you're not attached to the outcome now. Now you're attached to just the humor. It's not the outcome anymore. But what it did is it just gave me a completely different perspective to persistence, and all that whole process of getting to your destination. It takes time. And this is what I say to all my clients. Everything takes time. There is no such thing as a quick fix. There is no such thing as getting rich quick. Everything takes time. It needs to be nurtured. So that was that. So that was that story. Yeah.
Have you ever communicated with Hans since?
No.
It would be funny. I don't know, how many years ago was that?
Oh my God, like 20 years ago. It was just a long time ago.
It would just be funny if, or maybe serendipitous, even if you were to ever bump into him again and say, because I imagine, like he said, look, there's no way, you don't have a snowball's chance in hell of actually getting this job, but I just wanted to bring you in because
exactly. Yes, it's like it's fun. Like, this is fun. Like, I just want to meet the persona behind this. Behind this. Anyway, so it was very funny.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. So, but then ultimately you went from the tech space, like being a sales individual, to building your own tech company. Is that right?
Yes. So then I was headhunted in 2002 to work for a multinational based out in California, and that was amazing. That job really changed my life. Like, really changed my. I mean, I turned the whole thing around. We had massive salespeople, and it was a great company to work for. I just knew from the day that I was born that I was meant to be an entrepreneur. Like, I always had that craving. When all the children were playing with Barbie dolls, I was playing with calculators. So my parents knew that there's something not right here. Like,
Yeah.
like dolls, like she's not into all that stuff. I was obsessed with the calculator. Till this day, would you believe I've got calculators all around me? Don't ask me. I just love numbers. So I was always very much. I was very intrigued by, innovation and how things work and how things happen. And, I was always intrigued by how people create things and go on and become great people. I was always intrigued by that from a very young age. Even people in our families, that were successful, I was intrigued by that. And I desired that. I wanted that. And so in 2005, I started my own tech company. And so I had three. This is my third startup. So the first startup was essentially the company I worked for. I became their competitor, and I was developing peripherals out in China, like really, really gorgeous, sexy laptop bags and beautiful cables, beautifully designed. Everything was just so beautiful. And I got a contract with one of the largest retailers here in Australia, which was the Coles My Group. And that was just massive. It was a really big opportunity for me. Unfortunately, 2 years into that contract, the buyers changed and all these Maya, the whole strategy changed in Maya. So my products weren't ranged anymore, and it was very difficult for me to get them into other retailers here. So it died slowly, and the thing is, John, that I just didn't have the energy to just keep fighting. It was just such a hard for me at the time. Okay, looking back now, I would have done it completely differently, but I just lost my confidence, and it was like, okay, I've done that. Let's move on to the next project. And then the second startup was I started a software company. I saw that there was a huge gap in the academic sector. I started that. I had that company for 7 years, and it did really well. I turned over 7 figures. I had an infrastructure. I serviced a sector that was undernourished. But again, I got to that 7-year mark. I had my second son, and lying in hospital, putting my lip balm on. As I reached out to get my lip balm, my business card falls out on the bed. I suddenly pick up this business card, and it's like Mary Henderson, managing director. And I'm like, as this business card is defining who I am. Like, this business card is validating where I fit in society and how the outside world perceives me. So I had this epiphany in that moment. I knew in that moment that I would resign from my own company because it was not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. Absolutely, I knew that.
Now, there's a kind of interesting detail here that you sort of glossed over. Speaking of lip gloss, and that is the birth of your second son. So somewhere along the way, you found yourself in another relationship, which has
Yes,
led to the 2 boys that you now get to cherish and
yes,
enjoy in your life.
yes.
So you ended up finding, despite having gone through a traumatic relationship and whatnot, you ended up finding somebody that was the right fit for you. Um,
I think that what happens in our life is that my husband, we're still married. My
yeah.
husband is if I was to look at him today, would I marry him today? Probably not, because I've evolved
Mhm.
exponentially. And so the thing is that he was right for me at the time. And, he's a very, very, very good, decent man. That's a very hard worker and a great provider. On the emotional side, he's not very good, so he's not like, he's not the emotionally open, like expressive sort of a guy, whereas I am, I'm just like, I need to tell you how I feel, He's not like that. So that's been a bit of a challenge. But at the same time, it's been a massive learning curve as well for me as well. And so, with marriage, any marriage, you have to put the energy into it. It just doesn't
Yeah.
work on
Yeah.
its
Yeah.
own, right? It just doesn't. So, and the other thing is, John, like we always think that the grass is greener on the other side, and I have come to realize that unless I'm happy on the inside, nothing ain't going to happen on the outside.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's become more my purpose. It's like really being deeply happy deep inside myself. That's the
Watering
most,
that grass.
yeah, absolutely. You're spot on.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, and that's really amazing. So you had this epiphany. You decided, you know what, this is, I no longer wanted to be defined by these labels. I'm going to go out and do my own thing. I'm going to resign from my own company, which is a 7-figure company. In other words, turning over more than $1 million in revenue
Yeah,
annually. So I'm resigning from that company, and I'm going to start again, because
yeah.
by now you've started and built up a couple of different companies. So you've acquired quite a skill set, and rebuild yourself as Mary Henderson, coaching, branding
Yeah.
specialist, digital strategist, that kind of thing.
Well, the interesting thing is that when I resigned from my own company, thankfully we merged my company with another company, so that was great. And then it freed me. So I took a 12-month sabbatical. I just
Mm.
had to go and find myself. And on that first day, I would say to you that I was probably clinically depressed, and I didn't even realize it. Like, there was just so much burnout and so much deep sadness inside of me that I didn't realize it was all blurred out and numbed out for many, many years. And this moment, I realized that I just have to stop. I've got to stop. I need to stop and actually find myself. I need to change my life. Like, I
Mm-mm.
literally need to change my life.
And
So
what does it mean when we say find ourselves? Because I think we use that expression and it feels somewhat nebulous or esoteric when we try to uncover that. And so what did it mean to you to really find yourself?
for me, it was, and I didn't know this at the time, but I know now. For me, it was really understanding who am I truly at my soul level. Like,
Hmm.
what does that self actualization actually feel like and look like? How do I see myself really without
Hmm.
judgment?
Hmm.
Without anyone telling me you can't have it, you can't be. But what is my soul? What vision does my soul give me when I ask myself that question? And
What are the unique gifts that you possess and
yes,
bring into this world?
exactly, exactly. So in that 12-month sabbatical, I had a lot of mentors. Thankfully, I was very fortunate to be able to be in that position. And I had a professor in philosophy who was in that space for 30 years. And taught, he changed my life, like literally changed my life, because it wasn't self-help. It was none of that. It was going really deep. He brought a lot of ancient wisdom to the table. It was a very different experience. And he was the one that really helped me unravel, this true self and what it actually looked like. What knowledge, wisdom, and skills was I carrying that I wasn't declaring? And
Hmm.
so going back to my voice and singing is my talent, but my voice is my gift. So
Hmm.
the voice, the gift never leaves you. That's encoded in my DNA. So how am I going to channel that gift now? Okay, singing's gone. Let's look at another talent and let's channel it through that talent. And so it took me 12 months to actually get into this mindset of understanding Mary and getting comfortable with myself. I had to um, re-establish a relationship with myself, and I had to unlearn a lot of things and relearn my philosophy and my view of the world through my lens, not
Hmm.
through my parents' lens or my grandparents or society.
Yeah, that's quite a
And
process to go through to,
oh, huge.
especially um, a little bit older in life. I don't know, were
No,
you in your 30s at this point? Had you crossed over the
yes,
40s mark or?
30. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And so we're trying to unlearn like many, many years of beliefs
Yes,
that have been the sort of the frame of reference we have for existing in this world. Even that in itself can be quite a disconcerting process because there's kind of a metaphorical death that's taking place as we leave
yes.
behind the old version of ourself to move into a new, higher version of self.
100%. You're absolutely right. And it's exactly what it was. It was cathartic and confronting at the same time, because
Yeah.
all the beliefs that I had, suddenly I was challenging these beliefs and I'm like, "Oh my God, like I don't even believe in that. Why has that become my normal? Get rid of that." But it was questioning a lot of things as well, even with my parents. But it was a really big cleansing process that took a long time. And you know what, John? I'm still going through that. Like that was
Mhm.
12 years ago. Like I'm still on that trajectory. Like I don't believe that you ever give up. I think you are always cleansing. You're always finding the better version of you. You're always upgrading. You're always growing. For me, certainly that's the case. And so and I think that 12-month process allowed me to fully recognize and appreciate my genius zone, the
Mhm,
things
mhm.
that I can do with ease and grace. That's what it allowed me to appreciate, which brings me to where I am today.
Absolutely, yeah, and we kind of bring that story full circle, which is, just I think the ability to because you've been through this process yourself, you now have the ability to kind of look to others. You see where they might be struggling, and you say,
Yeah,
and because I think what you've highlighted is just the importance of coaching and mentorship. Human beings are wired to learn from other human beings, to learn through human connection. We can consume all of the books and all the information in the world, but really to connect with another human being, I say you can't read the label when you live inside the bottle, right? And so it just highlights the power of having that. Well, Mary, you've got a really, really fascinating story, and it's been such a pleasure learning, exploring even just a small amount of that. If people wanted to learn more about your story and connect with you, where's the best place for them to find you?
You can grab me on LinkedIn, Mary Henderson Coaching. You can connect with me on Facebook, Mary Henderson Coaching. follow me on Instagram, Mary Henderson Coaching, or go to my website, maryhendersoncoaching.com.
Very easy to remember. It's been such a delightful conversation. If you were to offer people or say, look, if they've taken the time to get to this point in the conversation and they were to take one nugget away from this conversation, what would you like people to take away from this in your story?
Oh my God, I just want people to know, and this is what I stand for, and I'm very passionate about this. Every single human being has accumulated thousands and thousands of hours of knowledge, wisdom, and skill. And when you merge all of that together, we get to call that our true currency. That is a currency. I can't tell you how many people are walking around on an actual gold mine. The question is, what are you going to do with it? Is it going to be a sheer memory of the past, or are you going to take that and do something with it? And that's what I want to leave behind.
That's amazing. What is the gold mine that you're sitting on, and how do we tap into that? Well, Mary, thank you so much for being on the show again today. It's truly been a pleasure. I'm really grateful we had a chance to connect.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe, or leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become. And I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you, because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.
Anyone can come from any place of brokenness and destitution and build an amazing life.